Hello guys, today we'll be covering a 2013 British drama film called The 13th Tale. As the movie begins, biographer Margaret Leah arrives at the country house of famous novelist Vida Winter. On her train journey to meet Vida, Margaret reads the famous novel The 13th Tale, written by Vida. She's been invited to stay with Vida to help her write her biography before she dies of cancer. During her first meeting with Vida in her library, Margaret is a bit nervous about meeting such a huge personality. Eventually, she asks Vida why she chose her to write her biography, even though she wasn't such a well-known writer. However, Vida doesn't give her a straightforward answer. On the other hand, Margaret is also hesitant to write, as Vida is known for telling a different story each time she's asked about her background in interviews. Vida then replies that she usually makes up stories during interviews so that she won't be bored with the same one over and over again. Also, it's clear from the beginning that Vida has a sarcastic personality, as she keeps on making fun of Margaret on different accounts. At one point, Margaret even gets up to leave, but Vida lures her back in claiming she's got an interesting story for her. However, Margaret makes it clear before starting that she only deals with facts. Hence, Vida needs to provide her with some verifiable information from the public record. Vida tells her that her birth mother was Adelaine March and that she's from St. Bart's, London. Next, she reveals that the local newspapers wrote about a fire that burned down her family home when she was 17, of which she bears proof in the form of a key-shaped burn on her palm. The next day, Vida's doctor arrives at the mansion to meet Margaret to explain Vida's condition to her. He reveals that Vida has pancreatic cancer, which is spread all over her body. This indicates that she has very little time left, and Margaret must understand her assignment as soon as possible. Later that day, we see Margaret sitting with Vida, getting ready to begin recording her statements for the book. With Margaret satisfied that she's telling the truth this time, Vida begins to tell her the events leading up to the fire that burned down her family home. As she begins narrating her story, we're taken back to the past. Vida grew up at Angelfield, the decaying family estate, with her identical twin sister, Emmeline. The mansion originally belonged to her grandparents. However, after their mysterious, unexplained deaths, the estate came under the possession of their mother Isabel and her brother Charlie Angelfield. During their grandparents' reign, the family was well off and had several servants. Eventually, the family wealth disappeared and only two servants remained with them: Mrs. Dunn, the housekeeper, also known as the Miss, and the gardener, John Digance, also known as John the Dig. It slowly revealed that their mother Isabel was often distracted by the abuse she suffered at the hands of her unhinged brother Charlie. As a result, she often finds herself mentally challenged, so the girls were mostly left to their own devices, becoming unruly and antisocial. The only adult supervision they had came from the two servants, Mrs. and John the Dig. Over time, the girls continued to grow more and more rude and uncivilized. They never listened to anyone but themselves, while their mother showed little to no care for them. One day, the twins sneakily took Mary Jameson's baby while it was sleeping on its cradle and rolled it down the hill. To discuss the matter with their mother, Mrs. Theodora Malsley, the local doctor's wife, arrives at the mansion. Shortly after, she's knocked out by a hit on the head by Isabel, even though she's not sure who hit her. The doctor eventually concludes that Isabel is not mentally stable, as she's taken to a mental asylum for treatment. Back in the present time, Margaret is seen dealing with her personal battles as she often sits alone staring at the window with a bracelet in her hand. In the meantime, she also tries to deduce the meaning of the story that's currently being told by Vida. Eventually, her search leads her directly to the Angelfield mansion, which has now turned into a ruin. Back in the twins' past, we see that Charlie slowly loses his sanity after Isabel is taken away from him. Sometime later, a governess is hired, Hester Barrow, to look after the girls in the absence of their mother. Hester seems like she was determined to discipline the twins by any means possible. At first, she manages to control Emmeline to some extent, but Adeline remains as rebellious as ever. Throughout the narration, Vida stops to ask Margaret whether she believes in ghosts. As the story progresses, it's shown that Margaret's beliefs towards ghosts slowly change from being skeptical to being a believer. Back in the past, we see that no matter what, Hester's discipline has little to no effect on the girls' behavior. Also, the story frequently mentions a woman in white, whom they call the Ghost. The girls, the servants, and everyone believed in its existence, except for Miss Hester. After failing to get the twins to behave, Hester speaks to the local doctor about the girls and wants them to be separated as an experiment. She wants to see if their behavior improves by any margin. While discussing the experiment, the doctor and Miss Hester grow closer to each other slowly. Meanwhile, contrary to their expectations, the experiment fails, as the twins do not show any signs of improvement. Instead, they're both heartbroken at their forced separation. Adeline does not speak and eat, and Emmeline weeps constantly. One day, Hester and the doctor are caught kissing by the doctor's wife, and they both disappear from the village. Vida tells Margaret that it's believed that they went to America. However, when Adeline is reunited with Emmeline, she gets violent and brutally beats her up. The story then moves forward a few years. By the time the girls were 17, they were all alone at Angelfield. Their mother, Isabel, had died in the asylum, presumably because of pneumonia. And soon after that, Charlie also disappeared from the mansion. But Mrs. and John the Dig agreed not to tell anybody, so that they and the girls could continue as they always had. Sometime later, Adeline discovers Charlie's body in the woods, where he had apparently shot himself. But she keeps that information to herself and said nothing to the others. Meanwhile, old age takes a toll on both Mrs. and John the Dig. Mrs. often forgets that Charlie is no longer with them and still prepares dinner for him. One day, while changing a bulb, Mrs. falls 3 flights over a banister to her death. Back in the present, Margaret hears noises and weeping in the house that night. She goes out to check and sees a woman in white roaming the garden. Margaret confronts her and asks what she wants, but her speech is unintelligible. She quickly deduces that the woman must be the other twin, Emmeline. She then sees Vida go to the woman's room and feed her. The next day, Margaret and Vida sit down as Vida continues the narration of her story. After Mrs.'s death, John brings in a local boy, Ambrose, to help with the garden, even though Adeline didn't like him. One day, John falls off an unsecured ladder and faces a surprise death. Though it looks like an accident, Vida could tell the ladder's safety catch had been tampered with. Meanwhile, fearing what might have happened if she told the authorities they were alone, Adeline pretended that her Uncle Charlie was merely on holiday in Peru. She is assisted in this lie by Ambrose, the boy John had hired to help. John's death troubles Margaret, as Vida insists Emmeline and Ambrose couldn't have done it. This leads her to suspect that Vida must have killed him. She starts pressing for answers, but Vida had already established that she won't be allowed to ask any questions during the narration. Between interviews, Margaret goes to explore Angelfield and is frightened away by someone. The next day, she meets Vida's doctor, who confirms that the white woman she saw last night is indeed Emmeline. She also learns the man currently living inside the Angelfield mansion is Aurelius Love, a harmless man who lives with his mom and occasionally camps out at the house. She also reveals that she suspects Vida might have killed the gardener John when she was a teenager. Later that day, when Vida asks her about her own life, she's hesitant to reveal anything initially, claiming that she doesn't share her story with anyone. Finally, Margaret breaks down and admits that she had a twin sister. Unfortunately, she was struck by a car as a child, a tragic accident for which Margaret and her mother have always blamed her. Vida tries her best to console her and tells her that it's not her fault, as there's nothing she can do about it now. The next time Margaret visits Angelfield, she finds Aurelius Love. He apologizes for their previous encounter, stating that he did not mean to frighten her. There are police cars outside the house, and Aurelius tells her that a skeleton has been found during the demolition. This makes Margaret think about the twins and the story she's heard so far. Since both of the twins are still alive, to whom do the bones belong? Margaret then realizes that there weren't 2 girls at Angelfield, but 3. She quickly rushes back to Vida's house to confirm, and learns that Emmeline has died recently. However, Vida doesn't confirm that there were in fact 3 of them. In a surprising turn of events, Vida reveals that she wasn't Adeline. The ghost that they were all afraid of was actually Vida, hiding from everyone who didn't know of her existence. She was fathered by Charlie just like the other twins, but her mother was not Isabel. She was born a few months later than the twins, and was abandoned at the estate by her unknown mother. Mrs. and John the Dig kept her existence a secret from the world, as she was probably the product of rape. The real Adeline was dangerously violent and jealous of anyone who got Emmeline's or Vida's attention. All the violent acts and death that happened in the mansion are one way or another linked to Adeline. She pushed Mrs. over the stairs and meddled with John the Dig's ladder to make it unstable. After John's death, the girls are left alone with Ambrose. Even though she warned Ambrose to stay away from Emmeline, he manages to get her pregnant and is fired by Vida. Later, Emmeline gives birth to the baby boy at Angelfield with the help of Vida. While Vida is delighted with the arrival of a baby boy, it was obvious Adeline was jealous of him. One day, Vida catches Adeline preparing to burn the baby alive and manages to sneak him away. She then leaves him on the doorstep in the nearby village, where he was taken in and named Aurelius Love. However, when Vita returned to the house, the room was ablaze and Emmeline was fighting Adeline, thinking her child was in danger. Then Vita manages to drag Emmeline out of the room and lock it, leaving Adeline inside. The key-shaped scar on Vita's palm was a result of her locking the door of the room whilst the key was red hot. The two sisters stay outside as the horrors of Adeline's screams echo in their ears. When the fire brigade and the cops arrived at the mansion, they assumed Vita is actually Adeline. Emmeline is the woman in white in the garden, and the events of her girlhood have sent her insane, but Vita has felt bound to care for her despite her illness. Margaret then makes a final journey to Angelfield, which is in the process of being demolished. In the final scene of the movie, Vita passes away moments after finishing the story. In the end, Margaret decides to stay in the country for a little while,